She's asked us to come down this evening and talk about the book that Karen and I are trying to write. And, of course, anytime you write about history, you should try to be accurate. You should be accurate and not only just try. This sometimes involves verifying memories of conversations and stories that you've heard over the years. And, excuse me, I should say books because we eventually hope to cover more subjects. Tonight we will talk about the early schools. All through the 1920s and 30s, the area from Perrine through Florida City, including both, were known as Redland District. And that's why we have entitled this segment, Redland District Schools. By the way, the Redland District Chamber of Commerce had a telephone number of 14, so you know they were with us real early. We are attempting to make our history as accurate as possible using Bureau of Land Management records, General Land Office records, legends, cemetery records, newspaper articles, census records, conversations with homesteaders and early settlers that we've had in the past, as well as some personal knowledge. This, as you can imagine, gets rather time-consuming and a lot of effort. Legends sometimes have accurate information, but many times they don't. Cemetery records are usually pretty good, and you can depend on them. But newspaper articles can be accurate and sometimes can be out in left field. Census records, of course, they're questionable as to spelling and dates of ages and things because it's up to the census taker. Oral histories, I'm pretty much soured on oral histories. You have to go see what happened, what really happened. Well, we'll start off with the history of the area. The first part of the area that was open for homesteading, here what we call South Dade, was open for homesteading in 1898. This was land south of the area of Eureka Drive and east of Chrome Avenue out to 117th Avenue and down to what we call Camel Drive today in Homestead. There was no big rush of homesteaders. It was a hard job homesteading with no roads south of Coconut Grove and only rough trails south to Cutler and no stores south of Cutler either. So the early homesteaders had to make your own trail. And if you had a horse or a mule, so that meant carrying everything on your back. Homesteaders had palmettos and pines to clear out to build some sort of shelter, and they had hordes of mosquitoes to keep them company while they were doing all this. And they still had to clear the area enough to raise a crop to satisfy the homesteading requirements. So it wasn't very pleasant living as far as it could go. Many of the homesteaders, of course, were single people, both male and female, but there were families with children. This soon led to the need for schools. Most families did not feel qualified to teach book learning. And the state requirement was that there had to be 10 children or students to qualify for a teacher or a school. In 1902, the homesteaders in the area called Silver Palm built a small log building with a palmetto thatch roof that as a school. The building was in the west side of today's Newton Road and south of Silver Palm Drive. The legend has it that to meet the 10-student requirement for the school, the underage Mildred Gosman, the first white child born in this newly settled area, was enrolled. I don't quite agree with them on that, but I've heard the story over and over again over the years. In 1904, this school building burned. Being in the middle of the pine woods invited trouble. The homesteaders, with little assistance from the county, built a new school on the northeast corner of the same intersection. This school was showing it, and school was in session. It likely was at lunchtime because there was about 50 people there on the grounds and on the porch. Now, this picture was made later in 1911. They were having a fish fry at the school. With of course, the school has been in private hands since 1916, and with the Cunninghams early on, and more recently with the Hoffmans. But with the recent death just a few weeks ago of Pete Hoffman, it's unknown what the future holds for this building. The school was, of course, used as a school until Redland Farm Life School opened. The second section of the area that was open for homesteading was in 1900, was the area west of Chrome Avenue and south of Eureka Drive. When the homesteaders in this area applied for a post office in 1906, they needed a name for the area. Redland was suggested and was met with approval. When they opened a new school the same year, the name Redland was given to the school. Redland School was built on the southeast corner of today's Redland Road and Coconut Palm Drive. This picture was taken from Coconut Palm Drive, looking at it. If the picture was just about as much wider as space between the edge of the picture and the building further, you would see Redland Road over to the right side. It's so close to it. But this, of course, is where the fruit and spice park is today. And as the students increased, the school was enlarged. You hear all the good stories about the fruit and spice park, but let me tell you the dark side. Most of the land that was used for the fruit and spice park was owned by the Redland Athletic Club. I have a list of the members of the people that were members of the Redland Athletic Club, and it's like a who's who of Homestead and Redland District. And they gave the land to the county for a park. This was most of the acreage that's involved with the park. And what their idea was, they had been trying to build some tennis courts and they had a ball field in the area, and they were trying to get some tennis courts built, but they didn't have the money to do it, and the county wanted the land for a park. Well, they thought their park was going to be tennis courts and ball fields and things like that. And as a result, they gave the land to the county to make a park. Well, after the school had moved out of this building, the Redland Women's Club had bought this building in 1916, and they still owned it. This was up into 1944. And the Women's Club had decided to stop having an organization, so they sold the building to Dave and Fred Kufelt. And the land next door there, you can see the house just around the edge there on the right-hand side. You can just see a little bit of a house back there. That was Ruth Campbell's aunt owned that house. That had been owned earlier by the Stewart family, and she had been postmaster of Redland from about 1926 up until 1935 when they did away with the Redland post office. And then the Zink family owned it then, and by using eminent domain, the county took over both pieces of property from the Zinks and from the Kufelts. So it left a kind of a bad taste in most of the people around Redland's area at the time. It could have done it, I think, a little better than they did. In 1907, a small frame building was built for a school in Homestead. This was located on the east side over beyond the Florida East Coast Railroad Station. As with other schools, there was very little assistance from the county. The building served the community for about 6 years. In 1913, a masonry school building was built on today's Northwest First Avenue in the 500 block. This is a very early picture of that building. As the number of students increased, the building was enlarged. Note the roof line of this building as we look at the next picture. You note there that the roof line is visible from the prior picture, and the two little steeples-like sticking up there are at the ends of that other building. This school was next door to the community cemetery, and Dr. Tower, the pioneer physician, didn't think this was healthy and led a drive to have the cemetery removed. Ben Marsh donated the gym at the left there. You can see where the arches are. There was an open-air gym, but it's still there. They just closed up around the side, and it's still being used by the school. The house at the left, you can see it's right like at the end of the street there, was relocated to the southwest corner of Northwest 8th Street and 4th Avenue, and it's still there, at 406 Northwest 8th Street. Of course, as I said, the gym is still in use. When Longview and Detroit schools were closed and were consolidated with the Homestead School, they needed transportation, and this was Hugh Ewing. He had 3 children that went to school at Homestead, or went to school at Longview originally, and they used these trailers to haul kids to the school. You can imagine what it would be like today trying to haul some kids around like that. Yeah. Now, in 1934, this school was named Neva King Cooper, who died that year. And this is what the school looked like in the 1940s. In 1921, a high school building was built in the 600 block of Northwest 2nd Avenue. This is the view, and you get a view from the courtyard. And next we have a picture what shows what, like the hurricane water standing around the school after the 1929 storm. The next picture we have is a building with some additions, which served until Southdale High School opened in 1953, thereafter serving as a junior high until the school board, in their infinite wisdom, tore it down. In 1908, 2 new schools opened. The first was in Princeton. John Murray was a homesteader in Princeton, and he gave land from his homestead on Coconut Palm Drive. And he assisted Albert Kerfoot, a builder, the carpenter, to building the school. Of course, this was the original part of the school, and then they had an expansion, and the part to the right is the original school, and the other unit was the second room they added to it as the expansion. An early teacher was Mrs. Mary Louise Barkus. She was a widow that homesteaded in the Princeton area. I went to school with her grandson. And this school, of course, operated until Redland FARMLIFE School opened. The second school that opened that year in 1908 was the Modella School. Martha Bauer Burden. I get those people names tied up because I know the other Bowers and Bakers were tied up together and married into each other. Gave land from her homestead for a school on the southwest corner of the intersection of today's Newton Road and Epmore Drive. The school also operated until Redland School opened. The original building was there until up to Hurricane Andrew, but it had been converted into a residence. We don't have any pictures available of this school. If anyone knows of anybody that may have some, we would certainly like to have it. 2 more schools opened in 1909. The first one was Eureka School. It was built on the south side of today's Eureka Drive, approximately where Newton Road would intersect. Eureka Road was better known then as Peters Road, as it led to the community of Peters on the Far East Coast Railroad. This school also operated until Redland FARMLIFE opened. And I don't know why they used the name Eureka. really. So I looked into it and found that most of the homesteaders, early homesteaders in that area, were refugees from the great freezes in North Florida in the 1890s that had their groves all killed by the freezes. And they came down here and they found that, and they thought they had found the place where there was frost-free. But we do not have any photos of this one either. But now with that, the meaning, of course, I mean, I'm sure most of you know what Eureka is. It's a Greek word meaning, the accepted meaning of it in English is, we have found it, or I have found it. The Perrine School was the second school that opened in 1909. The original school was on the east side of what is today's southbound lane of US 1. This road, when that road was platted, it was called Perrine Avenue when they platted it in 1903. And it's there between, as I think I mentioned, it was between Guava and Hibiscus Streets. This also was a one-room building. In 1916, a two-story masonry building was erected further south on what is today the 19300 block of US 1. The school, with some additions, operated there until 1978. After the closing, the vandals torched the 1916 building. The Longview School opened in 1910. This was reportedly the best equipped school in South Dade. This is a picture when it was under construction. Located on the corner of today's Tower Road and Palm Drive, many of the homesteaders in that area were accustomed to better schools. They were mostly educated people, and they were accustomed to schools. And students were transferred to Homestead in 1913 when the new building opened there, the present-day Neva King building. This building there in the picture used by the residents as a residence for many years. The parents were not satisfied with the first teacher that they had, and the young lady, and they hired Octavia Styling from Detroit, who taught there for the balance of that year. Ivan Mosier, his family homesteaded out there, told me that the first teacher was from Texas and had an accent. The homesteaders, most of them out there, weren't part of the area. That part of the area were mostly Union people, and this was just a continuation of the war between the states. And Ivan, I know Ivan pretty well. We worked together for a while, and he was quite a chunky guy. And he used to always talk about, he wanted everybody to go to school, but get a degree, get a degree. That's all he could talk about. And for a while, and I nicknamed him 360-degree Mosier. And it stuck for a while. Two more schools opened in 1911. The first one was a one-room frame building erected on Bales Road east of the Florida East Coast Railway Station in Goulds. It was built on land donated by J.C. Bales. And we had a teacher, she taught there all the time that school operated. Her name was Miss Isidore Anderson. I always thought that was a mighty strange name to hang on a woman. But she married Virgil Grunwell, who lived out on homesteaded out on Avocado Drive, and I knew their children pretty well. Lou Bell Grinnell Collins was married to Tom Collins, who lived up here in the Modella area, and the other one was Goldie Grinnell Maycutt. They were well known around Homestead. I'm sure that Ruth probably remembers them. Of course, this school also operated until Redland FARMLIFE opened. The Detroit School was the second school that opened in 1911. The building of the Detroit School was rather spontaneous. Several of the men of the community were sitting around discussing what each thought they should do next. And when the subject for school came up, they decided to build a community building to use as a school, town hall, and for other civic activities. In 1913, the students were transferred to Homestead, to the new school. The parents didn't like their children so far away and reopened their school. As a result, town built a new school where the present-day water treatment plant is located. As this became overcrowded, the school had been built across Caves Avenue on the Scott Caves old homestead. The Murray School opened in 1913, located on Haneland Mill Drive, just west of today's Chrome Avenue, and the James O. Murray Homestead. James was not related to John Murray, who gave the land at Princeton for the school. This school, of course, operated until the Redland FARMLIFE opened. So we do not have photographs of this school either, something we would really like to have. This makes 11 schools for white kids. There were no schools for black children, and there were schools for other black children in other parts of Dade County since the early 1890s, but there had been no school for black children in this area up until this time. In 1913, a school for blacks was established in Goulds under the leadership of Arthur and Polly Mays at the Mount Pleasant Missionary Baptist Church and the New Bethel African American Methodist Episcopal Church. That's a mouthful. This was the forerunner of the Goulds Church or school we know as Mays. I'm sure all of you have heard the stories about that Arthur Mays could pass as white, and he did on occasion. And this picture shows that he didn't have the features of the Negroid features. And of course, on the other schools here in Homestead, the Mrs. Fanny Starr Turner started in the 20s. Bob Jensen has really written some good articles on that, so I tried to go too deep on that. But anyway, the schools that she had down there was a one-room building, and it burned. And through Mrs. Turner's efforts, a portable school building was brought down from Miami on a barge and was floated up the Florida City Canal and placed on the north side of the 500 block rather of Southwest 8th Street, which Southwest 8th Street and Lucy Street are the same street. It became known as the Homestead Colored School, later renamed A.L. Lewis School, as they were doing with all the county schools of that period. More portals were added as they needed rooms. When the Homestead Christian Civilian Conservation Corps camp closed, the CCC camp there, they moved those buildings to the Florida City side to be used by the school. And the school facility was used by the community. This is the local Elks Club with the CCC building in the background. More portables were moved in as needed. In 1950 and 51, a new building was erected on the north side, the Homestead side of the street, now known as Laura Sanders School, in honor of the longtime teacher and principal. And we heard talk about Redland Farm Life School with each of these other schools. In 1916, 7 schools merged: Eureka, Goulds, Princeton, Modella, Silver Palm, Redland, and Murray. And it started in June of 1915. The patrons of these 7 schools met with Dr. J.L. McBrien, supervisor of school expansion with the U.S. Department of Education, for the purpose of discussing the probability of consolidating these 7 schools into one facility. The idea was met with great enthusiasm. The Department of Education was trying to develop schools that would teach good agricultural practices. Delegates from each of these schools met in a closed meeting, and they voted unanimously to consolidate. They decided the name of the school and accepted an offer from Will Anderson from his homestead for the land to build a school on. And this caused a little controversy around because 15 people decided everything about the school. But they went through with it. They wouldn't let anybody else have anything to say about the school. It became a big issue in the next election for school board. The school was built and opened that next school year. This is a view from the southeast, the auditorium in the back there, and then the second picture here is viewed from the southeast. After 4 additional rooms were added, this shows you the second arcade, and 4 rooms were added to the east side of the building. In 1927-28, a separate high school building was. We got the view is viewed in the 1940s of the front of the school. Hope we get it back and looking good like that again. In 1927-28, a separate high school building was added. Then they built this, which is the living quarters for some of the teachers. And downstairs to the left was the home ec department for the school. And they had kitchens, the equipment and everything in there so the kids could learn how to really cook and kitchen work. The rest of it was, the upstairs was all apartments, and the other part of the downstairs was living quarters for the principal. They called that building the Teachridge, by the way. And you can see where it was located behind the main school building in this picture to the side. And you can notice the water tank sticking up higher up over the school. It was on a tower back there. And in my 12 years of going to that school, we had one time when they found bird feathers in the water. So we had to go start drinking bottled water, and they cleaned the tank out, they're supposed to anyway, and they chlorined it so strongly that nobody could drink the water for the rest of the school year. So this is the 1940s high school building, and shows how the growth is. This is a May Day celebration in 1947. This is the 1947 celebration of the Redland Elementary, showing the auditorium in the center, the May Day. And the auditorium was unique in that it had the stage that could be opened out into the patio as well as back into the building to put on performances. And the gym building is off to the right in the distance there. And the agricultural building is off on the other side to the left back. Miss Phyllis Burke was a May Day queen or princess, whatever they called them at that time. Of course, consolidation of the schools required transportation for practically all the students. Early on, they used cars, as we showed the picture at Homestead, or cars pulling trailers to transport students. At Redland FARMLIFE, they used buses made by the Ranger Manufacturing Company, and the kids started calling them Texas Ranger buses. This is Redland bus number 1, driven by Dave Kufelt. He's the man that got his land taken away from him. This other picture was taken in 1923. George Kozel Jr. is standing at right with his hand in the pocket there. Catherine Bauer Baker is a young lady over the E in life there. The picture is actually, her face is encircled with a pin, but it doesn't seem to show up here. But this is the source of the picture. And this is another bus, a picture of number 3 at Redland FARMLIFE. And the next one is a picture of the bus at the Talbot home. And it's Mr. Talbot standing in front of it. Donald Talbot is indicated as a kid in the middle of the bus there. He became a 1930 graduate of Redland High School. And the daughter, Juanita, is up by the driver's seat. And she became a 1934 graduate from Redland High School. Mrs. Marie Talbot drove school bus for several years. This is the Talbot that Talbot Road was named after up there, 134th Avenue. This was the Gould's bus, splattered with mud. And note the man cranking the bus at the far right-hand side of the picture. And later on, they changed the type of bus to a semi-trailer. This is driver Barney Bishop. And you notice the steps down on the back of this bus. And the door there was controlled by a cable that ran back from the driver's seat. They had solid rubber tires on the trailer and on wooden wheels. And the Model T Ford truck pulling the trailer had pneumatic tires. This group here is another one of the pictures of the buses, and the taller kids there, the only ones that I could identify were from the Yorkman family that lived on the northeast corner of Haneland Drive and Naranja Road. Other buses had front entrance to the trailer, like this one. A child had to step up onto the running board of the truck, stepped up the back of the truck cab, then up into the trailer. And these were big steps for a first grader. I know. I rode these buses when I started first grade at Redland FARMLIFE. And that's me back there, 87 years ago, standing along by the back wheel of that bus. In January 31st of 1936, the first ever Dade County-owned fire truck was stationed at Redland FARMLIFE School. This truck was painted Ford black. The cities all had their departments with bright red fire trucks, but the county had one truck, and it was painted black at Redland School. This is Mason Roberts, whose father gave the land for the first Redland School in 1906. He was a graduate of Redland School and was the first Dade County fireman employed. Mason parked the truck on the west side of the high school building. His office was a closet just big enough for a small desk and a chair on the left side of the entrance to the high school building under the stairs. This stairway was removed in the 1970s renovation. As he was on call, he took the truck home at night, and the telephone at school rang in his house. This was the second truck. We don't have a picture of the first truck. I wish we did, but this was the second truck. I think the equipment on there is the same that was on the other one, but this is a 1935 Ford truck. The first one was a Ford Model A, 1.5-ton flatbed truck, and members of the future farmers at the school were trained to go out with him and to fight fires. We were all anxious to go, of course, anything to get out of class. And you know, this is the future farmer building in the background. This, as I said, was the second fire truck, and the pumper and the hoses and stuff, everything looked as if they're the same ones that were on the other truck. So I want to give a thank you, though, to Sharon for putting up with me and Karen with the work we've been doing on the other books and this, and Karen for and to Karen for the expert computer work she's been doing, and Bob Jensen for his encouragement with it, and Larry for getting me even started with this back 35, 40 years ago. And of course to the Flower Pioneers Museum, who belongs to most all these pictures. So thank you.